Right, well, we'll go ahead and get started, and as others join us, I will admit them to the forum. Want to welcome everybody who's here already to another Ventura County Interfaith Community Forum. We are so happy to have you. I'm a co-chair of the Ventura County Interfaith Community. The community's been in existence for about 16 or 17 years. And we're just excited to have everybody here. We're all about building bridges of understanding amongst faith communities in Ventura County. So welcome. Again, if you are joining us and you're not muted, please, this sounds so nasty to say this, but please mute yourself. And if you want to talk, then raise your hand and then you can unmute yourself if you have a question or something to ask. The next forum that we'll be having is a forum called Shintoism. It'll be an introduction to Shintoism by Bill Garlington. And the best way to get information on that is to subscribe to our mailing list at vcic.info. And let me just share screen with just a second, and I'll put in chat, I'll put the address for vcic.info. If I can chew gum and type at the same time. So in chat, I've put the address for vcic.info. And let me just really quickly share screen with you so I can show you I can't talk and chew gum at the same time. This is what the website looks like when you enter it. And if you see there's a big here, big subscribe to our email list here at the bottom. If you just click on that here, we'll be happy to add you to the email list and you'll get information about upcoming forums. But the next one is, I believe, on March 22nd. And it is an introduction to Shintoism by Dr. Bill Garlington of the United Methodist Church in Camarillo. Let me unshare screen now. At the end of our session tonight, there will be a question and answer period. And you're more than welcome to jot down questions in chat. If you can direct them to Linda Lowe, then that'll make it a little easier for us to gather the questions and perhaps categorize them so that we stay on topic as we pose the questions to our speakers. Before we allow your questions, we're going to give our speakers a minute or two to ask questions of one another. And sometime during that, even before that, we'll have a short survey that we'll ask you to complete so that we know how we're doing and how we can improve. All right, so I want to begin by introducing Linda Lowe. And Linda, let me pull up your bio real quick. Linda is best known as the priest's wife, but she was worn many hats over the years: public school teacher, university administrator for 20 years at MIT, Cub Scout leader, PTA president, mom, grandma, hospital chaplain, and most recently the author of a book titled The Second Leonard. She started as a Presbyterian and married a Baptist turned Episcopalian with a passion to become an Episcopal priest. Their journey took them together from Southern California to the Hudson Valley, and then to England, where Bill did his first year of theological college, while Linda worked at an American Air Force base. Linda taught school, going along the way to pay the bills, and they eventually settled happily into a suburban Episcopal church in Massachusetts, where Linda was the Episcopal priest's wife for over 30 years. After both retired, they chose to become Catholic, and shortly after that, Bill experienced a calling to become a Catholic priest, under a special provision for former Episcopal priests who are married. They returned to their native California to care for Linda's aging parents, and Bill was ordained a Catholic priest 5 years later, making Linda the priest's wife twice over. Since he has never decided what she wants to be when she grows up, she's perfectly happy to go along for the ride on this rather unusual journey. Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce the topic and our three guest speakers.
Thank you, Tim, and I'm delighted to do that. I've just made a few notes, a few of my own thoughts before I introduce the speakers, because I realize certain places are sacred because of what happened in the past. Gods showed themselves there, or prophets were born. Indigenous people and many of our ancestors had sacred spaces on mountaintops, rivers, and springs where gods sprang forth. Historically, sacred spaces can be large destinations where the journey is as important as the holy experience. The journey itself brings the pilgrim closer to God. Mecca draws millions who yearn to visit at least once in their lifetime. 1 million people a year flock to Varanasi to bathe in the Ganges, as their ancestors have for 4,000 years. It's important to Buddhists as well, since that is where Buddha first preached. One of the Catholic destinations is the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in northern Spain, where the remains of St. James are said to have been buried. This long journey by foot is contemplative and introspective. Jerusalem, of course, lures countless pilgrims of many faiths with holy sites for three major religions. Buddhists make pilgrimages to several sites associated with Buddha's life. These journeys seek meaning in sacred spaces as people step away from the daily routines to pursue a deeper purpose. Other spaces are closer to our homes and include most churches, synagogues, temples, and mosques that are sacred because of what happens in them now. God is invited in through prayer, songs, ritual, and words, and the people respond to God's presence. We usually think of sacred space as a physical structure, but it also consists of special behaviors, rituals, silent reflection, sometimes proper dress. There are boundaries and rules. It's a space set apart from the secular world. Although most religions teach that worship doesn't need to be confined to a special building, setting apart sacred space enables these traditions to create somewhere for people to connect with the divine. Of course, such a space can be created in one's own home, but for many, the distractions of daily living overwhelm the search for connection to the divine, and we seek a place where we find community with others who also seek to meet God and realize a deeper purpose. Whether human-made or springing from the natural world, whether large or small, sacred space connects us to a reality that transcends our fears. So tonight we have three speakers from three faith traditions who will tell us about their sacred spaces. Rabbi Mike Lottger, Father Konstantin Trumpauer, who is Greek Orthodox, and Arash Payan of the Baha'i faith. I'm pleased to introduce Rabbi Mike Lottger, whom some of you already are quite familiar with, who has been a speaker with us many times over. He's a man of many talents. As a physicist, he worked in wind, solar, and geothermal energy in his first career. He was president of a company that financed and installed 500 of the Palm Springs windmills. In 2003, he was ordained as a rabbi at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, where he also received his Master of Hebrew Letters degree. His rabbinic thesis addressed the theology of Jewish-Christian partnership. He served synagogues in Montana, Arizona, and California. He's presently Rabbi Emeritus at Temple Narami in Camarillo and community rabbi for the Jewish Federation of Ventura County and a chaplain for the Ventura County Fire Department. He's been involved in the Ventura County interfaith community since its inception, and he's also published a book for Paulus Press titled A Christian's Guide to Judaism. Rabbi Mike, welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I am going to jump right into a share screen and hope that it's working well. Thank you. So sacred spaces in Judaism. And one of the things we were talking about a little bit as we began is, what does the word holy mean? In Hebrew, holy is kadosh. And the concept of holiness in Judaism speaks about a special exclusive relationship or a unique relationship between parties. Clearly, in the religion aspect of this, we're talking about a relationship with God, but one of the words for marriage is kiddushin, which is also speaks to the special relationship between spouses. So I've got a lot of material and not a lot of time. So I want to talk about two major elements of sacred space. One is the temple in Jerusalem, and the second is the synagogue. The first thing that's mentioned as holy in the Bible is time. In the opening of the 7 days of creation, it says God blessed the Sabbath and hallowed it. God gives the land to Abraham. Although we call it the Holy Land, it's not described as holy. In fact, the only thing that's holy is time. And the rabbinic tradition is that when God sees the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, God understands that people need something more physical rather than just time. So the description of the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary, in rabbinic tradition, not necessarily in the order of the Bible, in rabbinic tradition is given impetus by our worshiping the golden calf. In Jerusalem, there were two temples built, one by Solomon. David has this portable temple, the tabernacle, which exists for the wanderings in the land, going from Egypt to the Holy Land, and then the period of the Judges and the early kings, no temple. The idea is that David conquers the land of Jerusalem and puts up the portable tabernacle on the Temple Mount. Talk about Temple Mount more in a moment. And then only his son Solomon, which in Hebrew is Shlomo, his peace, is allowed to build the temple because David was a man of war. The temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, 586 BCE, rebuilt 80 years later under the Persian rule. And it's a pale imitation of the original, sort of the first temple, then the second temple. And then Herod, much later on, about 30 BCE, rebuilds the temple into a magnificent structure, which is destroyed then about 100 years later as well. So this is an artist concept, and it's based on a lot of archaeology about what the temple might have looked like in the time of Solomon. So the temple is here, and the city of David, where they believe David's palace may have existed, or the archaeologists are always fighting about this, is here. And it encompasses a spring of water, because that was the most important thing about a city. First, you want to be in a high place to be able to fight off invaders, and you need a water. So if you enclose the city in a wall, you don't have to leave it to get the water. Again, just an artist concept of what Solomon's temple would look like. Here's the temple and the buildings surrounding it. Herod rebuilds the temple, builds an enormous supporting wall. So I'm going to talk, this here would be the remnants of the Western Wall. When we see this great image of the Western Wall, that's actually not a wall of the temple, it's a wall of the foundational walls supporting what's called the Temple Mount. And the temple itself is here. This is actually a very large scale model of the temple. And So the western wall is on the opposite side. This is actually the eastern wall, lots of gates going into the temple. And this gives us kind of an indication of the key elements of what the temple looked like. And by the way, in Jewish tradition, holy places are really twofold. This, the Temple Mount, and the graves of righteous people are considered to be fundamentally holy. Of course, the synagogue is a place of holy worship, but schools actually have a higher level of sanctity than a synagogue. You're allowed to take a synagogue and turn it into a school. You're not allowed to turn a school into a synagogue under strict Jewish law. So what you have here is the southern wall, and the gates to go into the temple. People would go in one gate and come out the other gate. You can still see these gates. I'm going to show you some pictures of them as they exist today. The city was up here, and there was a valley running between the city and the Temple Mount, so there had to be elevated arches so you could get up into the temple. So we have Wilson's Arch and Robinson's Arch. And so here's Robinson's Arch, the way it would have looked in ancient times. In 1967, from 1948 to 1967, the old city of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, was governed by Jordan. And in 1967, the Israelis gained control over the area. This is the way the arch looked in 67. And this is basically debris over thousands of years. This is the way it looks today. And this is kind of the height, I would say, of a person. So a tremendous amount of archaeology has taken place in Jerusalem. And then Wilson's Arch, which is the other arch, it still can be seen, although it's certainly, you can see the street level is now almost at the top of the arch. And this is the western wall, where there's a lot of prayer that takes place. And this is the men's side. And you can actually go under the arch, and there's a prayer area under the arch. Again, the way it looks today, the western wall area is considered a synagogue, an Orthodox synagogue under the state of Israel. So the men and women pray separately. And then there's a ramp where non-Muslim visitors can enter the Temple Mount. Here's Robinson's Arch, and this has been designated an area for liberal Jews to pray, where men and women can pray together. So with the destruction of the temple, a major innovation with the destruction of the temple, I would say a reform of Judaism was to say that the rabbis reformed Judaism from a religion based on animal sacrifice to a religion based on prayer and study of sacred materials, and that takes place in the synagogue. As Linda said, we take holiness into our homes. So in the rabbinic tradition, our homes become a mikdash me'at, a little temple. So some of the things that took place in the temple, like showbreads, become challah, and the priests washing themselves in basins in the temple in Jerusalem become washing rituals in the home. The synagogue is actually a Greek word. It comes from, it is the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew term Beit Knesset, a house of meeting. It is not a temple, although many synagogues, including several that I'm involved in, call their synagogues a temple. And the key elements, which I'm going to illustrate, I'll actually just illustrate them with a little image. So some of the controversial things is using music. In Orthodox synagogues, men and women pray separately. That's also true in Islam. In more liberal movements, Reform and conservative Jews, men and women pray together. In the United States, synagogues are supported by their membership. In Israel, Orthodox synagogues are supported by the state. So there's all kinds of interesting issues that rattle around there. So if you went into a synagogue, you'd find some of these elements. There's a seating area, and particularly, I would say in the United States, it adopted a model of a kind of a stage and a seating area. But the major things that you'll always find is the ark with the scroll of the Torah in it, a continual light, places to light candles, places to read from, And I have some illustrations of some synagogues very briefly. Here's the Great Synagogue in Florence. It is a wonderfully magnificent building. The only thing it doesn't have are a lot of Jews, because there's just not that many Jews in Florence, Italy. And at the other extreme, another congregation I served in Bozeman, Montana, very simple building converted into a synagogue. So here's the Ark with the Torah scrolls, and there's the eternal light or continual light. This is in Casablanca, Morocco, a synagogue actually built by my wife's grandfather, and it takes about half of a home building. And here I'm actually standing, taking this picture at the reading table. In the Sephardic tradition, the reading table is in the center of the synagogue, and here is the Ark. And this is now in Guatemala City, where I served the congregation for High Holidays a few years ago. Tiny, this is it. This is the meeting place. It is a home. So this is the living room. There's the president of the congregation and a woman leading services, and she's now in Jerusalem becoming a rabbi. And very small, but here is the Ark with the Torah scrolls in the Ark. And while we're talking about Torah scrolls, this is what a Torah scroll looks like. If you've been in a synagogue where Torah is read, typically during a bar or bat mitzvah, the scroll is taken out. It is the holiest object in Jewish tradition. It is the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and it's handwritten by a scribe. There's no vowels, there's no punctuation, there's no uppercase, there's no lowercase, and that's a whole interesting subject in itself. And this would be what a Torah scroll would look like. This is actually the very beginning of the scroll, and as some of you know, Hebrew is read from right to left. So this is the opening of the Bible, Bereshit bara, and actually they would typically chant it, and I happen to know the chant of this: Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. And there's significance to everything. All these little crowns, even the shape of the first letter has significance to it. Of course, your home becomes a mikdash me'at, a small sanctuary. And I love Harold Kushner's quote: the question is not, how can I be more Jewish? That's not the challenge. The question is, how can I be more human? Judaism is not the problem. Life is the problem. Judaism is an answer, the answer for Jews. Religion comes from the same root word, as I'm always saying, as the word for ligament, which joins us together. So with the destruction, our homes become small temples. One of my teachers would say, this is a question for Jews. It'd be interesting to know if it's true for other religions as well. If someone entered your home, would they know it's a Jewish home? Interesting question. Oh, yeah. So let me just comment quickly. I have no idea how much time I am on, but one challenge is seeing the holy in the everyday. So going from particular places which we designate as holy, the challenge is seeing holiness in the everyday. So here's an everyday thing: a supermarket. And you know, if you go, and I was in one today, and you're rushed and things are expensive and you're having trouble finding things, but take a moment and step back and realize that in a world where most people don't have, 40% of people don't have clean water to drink, in history, most people have lived on the edge of starvation. Here we are in this magnificent place where every possible food you can think of is lined up and structured carefully. I always get a particular kick out of the produce area, where if you're in a fancy schmancy supermarket, you get the broccoli is not only spritzt, it thinks it's raining, but you can sometimes even hear thunder. And again, everything is clean and healthy and wholesome. And as my friends know, I once did a sermon where I observed that I could be a very happy person if I had no mustard in my life at all. Deli mustard, dayenu, it's enough for us, enough for me. So in Gelson's, when I was preparing this sermon, I went and counted the number of choices of mustard. And I counted 39 choices of mustard. Did the sermon again, couldn't use mustard. So I went to Whole Foods to count olive oil. And I counted 92 choices of olive oil. Not safflower oil, not peanut oil, not, God forbid, Crisco, but olive oil, there's different spices. I always joke that there's virgin, there's extra virgin. I never did find any of the slutty olive oil, and I'm still looking for it. But imagine you are in a world where God not only gives you clean water, God not only gives you enough food to eat. Most of us, the challenge is not eating too much. God not only gives you mustard and olive oil, but you have to sit and make a decision of 39 choices of mustard and olive oil. The question then is, what is our response to that? And I believe the religious response is to realize you've been given a gift, and then our job then is to give back to the world, to share the holiness, to share the gifts that God has given us. And I think that's it. So I'm going to stop my share and turn it back to Linda.
Thank you, Rabbi Mike. I think you've probably generated some interesting questions. People can start typing their questions into chat anytime they choose to do so. I'd like to know a little more about the idea that the first sense of holy was time. I'm fascinated by that idea.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Our next speaker is Father Constantine Trumpauer, who is new to our community. I believe he started out in Portland, Oregon, and kind of stayed in the Pacific Northwest before heading away from the rain. He has a Master's Divinity from Holy Cross School of Theology, graduated in 2016. He also has a master's degree in teaching. And he worked for his archdiocese on technical support for their internet ministries. And he also worked as an instructor for the Archdiocesan School of Byzantine Music, which is a fascinating topic. I hope he includes a little bit of that in his talk. He was ordained to the diaconate and priesthood in 2017. He served in Anaheim before coming to Camarillo. And he and his wife, wives of Greek Orthodox priests, are called their presbytera. So his presbytera is Adrienne. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And they have 3 sons, and they arrived at St. Demetrius here in Camarillo about a year ago. So welcome, Father Constantine, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Linda. Can everybody hear me?
We hear you great. Thank you.
Rabbi Mike, you're hard to follow. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything, so everyone can zone out and look at the white wall behind me. That's fair enough. So I'm just going to go down the bulleted list as it was kind of presented on the website, to the question, what spaces do you consider sacred? Immediately I said, okay, sacred. Well, how do you define sacred? So I looked at the American Heritage Dictionary. Why not? And it says dedicated to worship of a deity, also worthy of religious veneration, and then made or declared holy. And in the Greek, we use the word agios for holy, and immediately comes to mind the prophet, Isaiah, and his vision that he had of the cherubim and seraphim, 6-winged, many-eyed, ceaselessly singing and crying out, holy, 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 Lord of Sabaoth, heaven and earth are filled with your glory. Agios, 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 Kyrios Sabaoth, as it says in the translation that the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese uses, the Septuagint, or the translation from the Hebrew Scriptures, according to, as history and tradition has it, the 70 translators. And Rabbi Mike, feel free to, anything that's pre-New Testament, you just weigh in on it, okay?
Don't tempt me. You really don't want me to.
I know. Sorry, it's a presentation. It's not coffee talk. But when people that we use the word diaspora, or the dispersion of people from the Holy Land, when they wanted to continue studying the scriptures of the Old Testament, but they lost the Hebrew language or whatnot, there was a translation into the Greek language. using 70 translators, some historians say, and this is what the Greek Orthodox Church, Eastern Orthodox churches subscribe to and use and have used for a very long time. And so we would say first that God is holy. We see this in the Old Testament, the New Testament, in many places, especially in the Psalms. We believe he dwells in his holy temple. It's wonderful to follow you, Rabbi, talking about the tabernacle, that the people needed that. You know, God doesn't dwell in one particular place or another, but everywhere, right? But the people needed to focus. They needed a place to work, but made of expensive things that they valued, so that they would find worth in it, right? If you someone wants that, God doesn't want our leftovers. He doesn't want our best. And so if we really pour into him with all that we have, all of a sudden we find more value in what who he is because of what we've offered. Let's see. So what makes something sacred? I want to speak just a little bit about the architecture of the early church. So of course you can look in the book of Acts that the earliest Christians were Jewish, and that they would go and worship at the Temple of Jerusalem on Sabbath, but then they would also go to their homes and worship in their homes. Our Lord said, "Do this in remembrance of me." And so they would break bread and they would sing psalms together, and they would offer the Eucharist. When we say the word Eucharist in Greek, Eucharist means thanksgiving. It comes from the Greek word Evcharisto, which in modern Greek, you say that when you just say thank you, Thanksgiving. You know, how you doing? You want some more salt on that? Yes, Evcharisto, like thank you. But after the destruction of the temple that Rabbi Mike talked about, the most recent temple, circa 70 AD by CE by the Romans, there was a radical restructuring of society, both for Jews and for Christians. They had to rediscover and identify without temple worship. And we see several hundred years later, fast forwarding to past the large persecution of Christians, worshiping in catacombs, due to emperors like Maximinus, Diocletian, who were slaughtering because it was bad for the religion state of the Roman Empire. But my name's Father Constantine, and I was named after the Emperor Constantine, all the way back there. So when we had the Peace of Constantine, or the Edict of Toleration around 311, 313, in the Roman Empire, Christianity began to use the basilicas, or the Roman town hall, to worship. Those were rectangular buildings. And it wasn't until really the 14th century or so where we had a crystallization of theology in church architecture, combining a cross-shaped building and a dome. And a very dramatic use of this, of course, would be the Church of Holy Wisdom, or Hagia Sophia, which is still today in modern-day Turkey. The second one, the first one was burned down, tragically, but the second one still stands. And was just recently converted into a mosque. But prior to that, we were able to go and see it as a museum and see these great heights at which freedom of space was used. So, okay. Our own small church here in Camarillo, dedicated to a soldier who preached Christ and was martyred for it, whose name was Demetrios, so Saint Demetrios. We have a dome, and we have a very humble cross. Strictly speaking, it's not our appropriate temple church, but it's a multi-purpose building that we built first on the property. So, but it's very beautiful, and everyone's welcome to come see it sometime. But back to back to what is holy. God is holy, and he is calling us throughout time to be with him, for him to be our God and for we to be his people. And one of the terms that we use is theosis. In Greek, God, the word for God is theos, and the process of becoming like him or deification is called theosis. And so like a good business plan, all that we use to worship God, the spaces, our own behaviors and rituals ought to back up to the ultimate goal of gaining the attributes of God, being purified of those things which are not of God, so that we might be like him. In 1 John chapter 3, verse 2, John the evangelist says, "Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it does not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." And so this idea of becoming like God and seeing him more clearly is a very important part of our tradition of becoming holy. And so our churches are structured with three sections. The entrance, called the narthex, where we have various religious images. In Greek is ikona, which means image, and we call them icons of Jesus Christ or his mother, or various people who were revealed to live a life pleasing to God and make room in their hearts for him to dwell in them, the Holy Spirit to dwell in them. For people to venerate, not worship, we have two specific words that are very different. We have proskinisis, which means to venerate or offer honor. And then we have latrevo, which means the worship due to God alone. And that's a very important distinction, because some people get the idea that we worship pictures. One priest in Georgia humorously noted, does somebody think you're worshiping your grandmother when you kiss her picture at night before you go to bed and say, "I love you, Grandma"? I said, "Of course not. It's your grandma." I said, "Well, that's the idea." So the narthex is the initial area where you come in and you light a candle and you slow down from the busyness of life, and then you enter into the nave, the main area of the church, where the faithful stand or sit. Traditional Orthodox churches don't have pews. They have freedom of motion, so you can walk around. There may be some chairs on the exterior. Our church does have pews, so that is hindered. Being able to move around, it helps you zone out less when you're able to move as well. And then, of course, we have the sanctuary, which is behind a screen holding up icons, where the table for bloodless sacrifice is in imitation of Revelation 19, where the 24 priests are worshiping around the altar of our Lord, also connecting all the way back to the image of the vision of Isaiah of the throne of God, with the incense billowing and the angels ceaselessly worshiping around it. In our divine liturgy, we also sing multiple sections, chant multiple sections from Isaiah's prophecy, his vision. And the priest, after he receives the gifts of the body and blood of Christ, says the same thing that the prophet Isaiah said after having the coal with the tongues touched upon his lips. "Behold, this has touched my lips, and will take away my iniquities, and will purge my sins." Is there a protocol, behavior, or dress requirement when entering the church? It's a real meet you, excuse me. It's a real, we meet you where you're at. The goal is love. At the same time, we look for modesty. The joke at summer camp is modest is hottest. And so, and the outside affects the inside. So priests typically wear robes for good reasons, but I've gone over time, so I think I'll just stop there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I I'm sure that this has generated a lot of questions, and we look forward to having that time with you as well. Also, some of the comparisons and contrasts that you've been making with other faiths, I think, can inspire some good questions. So people, please put your questions in chat. Our third speaker is Arash Payan, who has also spoken with us before. He comes from the Baha'i faith. He's a lifelong Baha'i who lives in his native Thousand Oaks with his wife and 2 daughters. And he studied computer engineering at the University of Southern California. And he and his wife run classes, a youth group on Friday nights, and a couple of virtues classes for children every Sunday morning in the park. So Arash, we look forward to hearing from you about Baha'i. I did a little research on the internet, and I discovered you have some very beautiful places around the world, and you also worship in very small groups. At least in this country. I have no idea what you do elsewhere. So look forward to hearing.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and thanks BCIC for hosting this and letting me speak. I have I've got a tough opening act to try and beat, but I'll do my best. So yeah, I wanted to I think actually Linda hinted to this at the beginning before we started speaking. And she mentioned that, a space can be sacred because of its history or because of we make it sacred. And so actually I wanted to talk about that first kind before we go on. So let me share my screen with you guys so you can, here we go there. And do that. Oops, wrong one. All right. So hopefully you guys will see, can see my screen now. Unfortunately, I can't see any video anymore, but I'll just assume you guys are all there. So what I wanted to talk about is, again, this is kind of my take on what sacred is. So please, this is not like some official Baha'i, don't interpret this as official Baha'i ruling on what's sacred and what's not. This is just my understanding. So one thing that's sacred is that what most people would traditionally call sacred is a pilgrimage. And a Baha'i pilgrimage is a trip that's a 9-day pilgrimage. And how it starts is Baha'is go to the Holy Land. And for Baha'is, this is in Haifa, Israel. And you can see a little image of the city of Haifa. It's a port city in the north of Israel there. And in Haifa, there is this mountain called Mount Carmel, and Mount Carmel, and this is a portion of it, is the home to the administrative center of the Baha'i faith, and these 19 terraces that you can also see here, these gardens, and at the center of the mountain is this shrine right here in the middle. And the shrine is currently the resting place of 2 of the significant figures of the Baha'i faith. And so I'll just give a quick review in case you hadn't been at one of our earliest talks about what the Baha'i faith is about. Probably the 3 most significant figures of the Baha'i faith are Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. There is the Bab, that's B-A-B, which is the Arabic word for gate. And the Bab is like the forerunner to Baha'u'llah, similar to John the Baptist as being the forerunner to Christ. The Bab came to prepare the world for the coming of Baha'u'llah. And then the third figure that I'm going to mention after that is Abdu'l-Baha, which is the son of Baha'u'llah. And he was the center of the faith after the passing of Baha'u'llah, he passed away in 1921. Actually, this is a 100-year. It's the centenary of the passing of Abdu'l-Baha this year, or last year. So anyway, in this shrine that you see here up on the picture, that is the resting place currently of the Bab, the forerunner that I mentioned, and Abdu'l-Baha. For Abdu'l-Baha, this is actually a temporary resting place until a shrine for Abdu'l-Baha is completed, which is actually currently under construction. And There are no pictures of the inside of the shrine. I've had the privilege of being able to go on a pilgrimage and go inside it, and inside it is just a room. Of course, when you go there, before you enter, you take off your shoes and dressing modestly, of course, and you go in, and people go in and just quietly pray. And there's it's a simple room. There's nothing fancy. There's a tablet on the walls, if I'm not mistaken, written on like framed tablets, like holy writings. Yes, and so that would be. And here's another close up of the shrine there, and this is at the center of the mountain in Mount Carmel, in Haifa, Israel. And there are some other gardens here where these are also the resting place of various family members of what we call the Holy Family, are also resting here in the mountain. This is the son of Baha'u'llah and his wife's resting place. And if you go further north to a city called Acre or Akkad, depending on if you have the Hebrew word or the Arabic word for the city, there's a place called Bakji, and there is where the shrine of Baha'u'llah, the resting place of Baha'u'llah, is. And here's some of the gardens there. And this is the entry to the shrine of Baha'u'llah, where Baha'u'llah is buried. And inside there, again, I've had the privilege of going in there. We don't have any pictures, but if you go inside there, it's a room with a kind of a indoor garden in the center of it, with trees and plants just kind of reaching up towards the skylight and the ceiling. And then you can just there's like a square pathway around the border of the room where you can go there, say prayers, and approach the threshold towards the room where the actual, where Baha'u'llah is actually buried. You can say prayers there, and then you quietly walk out. So it's a place for people to go and pray. And actually, so right now, while the Baha'i faith is still rather small, this is a practical, this can happen, but the shrine of Baha'u'llah, as you can see here, right here in the center, if you can see my cursor or not, I don't know, has a pathway along it. Seeing these gardens here, and this pathway, you can see just a quarter of it is built right now. But eventually, the intent is that in a time whenever there are more and more pilgrims, where they can't all just go into the room, people would just circumambulate these shrines whenever they go on pilgrimage, and not unlike what happens today in pilgrimages around the world for other faiths. So, yeah. And and so I'll just give you a quick preview of the construction of the Shrine of Abdu'l-Baha, which is still ongoing. I'll speed it up for you. So you can see here, there's going to be a center for where the resting place of Abdu'l-Baha will be, and gardens on the top as well. So, and then I think there's another. So there's this kind of in between holy place that the Baha'is have, and this is the seat of the House of Justice. This is where the administrative heart of the faith is. This is where we turn to for our guidance now. So after Abdu'l-Baha, the son of the Prophet, passed away, he appointed his grandson the guardian of the faith, and after that, we have the House of Justice, and they meet here, and they are elected every 5 years. And this is with divine assistance, they run the affairs of the faith, the administration of the faith. And this is an entrance to that building we just saw there. And so those are the places that are sacred because of the historic events that happened there. And I didn't show you all the places where during the early times of the faith where significant figures were living and events happened, but those are all places that people visit on pilgrimage. But I wanted to talk about temples now, and these are the places that we build in every city, in every hamlet, in every town, that we make sacred. In the Baha'i writings, Baha'u'llah ordained that at the heart of every community there should be a temple where people of all walks of life can come to pray and praise God and share devotions and be a point of unity. Places where people of various capacities and races and souls can come together in order that love and agreement should be manifest between them. It's a universal shelter for people of all faiths or no faith. It's a place for all people to come together. And so I think I'd like to share. So actually, this is a temple that we have here in Chicago, in Wilmette. This is the what we call the Continental Temple. It's like the mother temple for North America. There you can see the outside of it. It was hard to get the scale on some of these, so it's quite large, but doesn't necessarily look like it. So on the left, you can see the exterior of the temple, and on the inside, you can see the interior. And then here's a temple in Cambodia. This is the Lotus Temple in India, in New Delhi. And then here's one in Santiago, Chile. You can see it at night. It lights up, and it has this alabaster exterior, and there's the inside you can see. And the inside of the temples are all kept very simple. There's no altar or pulpit. There's no place where any one person speaks above all. There are no sermons given in any of these places. The devotions that are held there are not led by any one person. So they're always the readings that are shared there and the prayers that are shared there are always from different people. There isn't any regular person that's always the one. There's no clergy, I should say. That's the simplest way of expressing it. So just simple chairs there. And of course, music is an important part in Baha'i devotions. It's a way for our soul to reach the divine, a ladder to the divine, as they say in the Baha'i writings. And in these devotions, we have choirs or soloists singing, and they sing songs that are composed of the holy words, only from the writings. And these songs are unaccompanied by instruments, or they're purely a cappella. So it's a very simple type of devotion. And that was the last. Oh, and then so those are what the temples are like. But beyond the devotional components of the temples, these temples are actually referred to in the Baha'i writings as a Mashriq al-Asghar, and that means the dawning place of the praise of God. And this is more than just a location for prayer. It's actually meant to be as an institution that serves the educational and humanitarian role to people of all faiths. So beyond the temple where devotion happens, this is supposed to be the center of this area, but then around it are dependencies where are supposed to be established hospitals, schools, universities, homes for the sick and disabled, in general, social services that are meant to relieve suffering, sustain the poor, provide shelter, solace, education, and advancement for the city or the town or wherever it may be. So we're still in the early age of the Baha'i faith, so we have yet to see how these dawning places will really mature and develop, but we have a blueprint and a framework for it, where we know that it starts with devotion and praise of God to bring people together, and from that center will develop these institutions of service to the broader community. And so that's where I think that's the kind of place that we make sacred. But there's one last place that I want to talk about that gets made sacred, and this is anywhere that mention of God is made. And there's a prayer I'd like to just put up on the screen for us all to take a look at. This is a Baha'i prayer. I'll just read it. Blessed is the spot and the house and the place and the city and the heart and the mountain and the refuge and the cave and the valley and the land and the sea and the island and the meadow where mention of God hath been made and his praise glorified. So any place that we want to make sacred, we can make sacred simply by sitting down and praying and mentioning God, and that can be made sacred. And that is all that I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Arash. That was wonderful. The contrast, I think, is fascinating among the different places of worship, the different faiths, and how the sacred is shown and shared. I think before we go to your questions, I just want to mention that, Tim, is this the time when we should be asking them to think about doing the questionnaire, the evaluation?
Yes, I will put the survey in the chat right now, and it's almost there.
Okay, so please, we're doing it early enough so that you'll have time to give us an evaluation, and you don't have to wait until the very end. So that's very helpful to us. So please be sure to go to chat.
All they need to do is click on it, and it'll load the survey into their browser.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're ready for your questions. Arash, since you were the last one to speak here.
Linda, we said we would allow the speakers to question each other.
Oh,
first.
That's right. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
Yes, please. Okay, we have 3 speakers, and they're going to have their own conversation here.
Can I ask the first question?
Sure.
Is that all right?
Go for it.
Yeah, Rabbi Locker, I was wondering, could you go into a little more detail about, this may just be my naivete, but can you go into some more detail about why the tabernacle was chosen as the sacred thing? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding it, because you said that was supposed to be the representation of sacredness. Am I expressing that? Oh, you're muted, by the way.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I got it. So in the Bible, God says, and Father Constantine reminded me of the formulation that God would be everywhere. And the question is, why do we need a physical spot? And the Hebrew is quite interesting. It's Asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. It's, God says to Moses and Aaron while they're in the desert, probably on Sinai, no, after Sinai, build me a mikdash, a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. And if you pay careful attention to the language, it doesn't say that I may dwell in it. It says that I may dwell among the people. So it is a focal point for prayer. And I think, Father Constantine talked about this with the icons, is that it's not that we're worshiping the sanctuary, but it is a physical place, I would say, to help us focus on prayer. And there's excruciating detail about what the tabernacle, how you make it, the interior decorations, and you can actually find some nice representations online. It's actually quite small. It could fit in a modest parking lot. And in fact, some people think the Holy of Holies and the Temple Mount in Jerusalem was a place where the tabernacle was placed. But I would say the idea is a focus that we, being physical people and not just spiritual people, needed a focus to connect with God. And in fact, it gets more specific. There's the Ark of the Covenant with the cherubs on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And God says, I will basically speak to you, Moses, from between the cherubs.
Okay.
I have a question. Arash,
sure.
The images that you showed all of us are just amazing of these temples all around the world. And I'm wondering, is there form or organization in terms of how these are designed or thought through? Or I mean, of course there is, with designing a building, but I probably can't get past my hierarchical thinking. Is there an overarching structure or body of representatives that okay this and don't okay that, or is it just, how's it done?
Yes, actually, as I alluded to in the earlier one of the slides, we have whenever the Baha'i faith was founded, we had the prophet founder Baha'u'llah, who appointed his son Abdu'l-Baha to be the center and the guide of the faith for people to turn to for guidance after he passed, and then his grandson. And then after that, we have the House of Justice. So the House of Justice, what we call the Universal House of Justice, who operates in Haifa, Israel, and they're in that kind of that Greek building you saw, the Greek-like building that you saw there on Mount Carmel. They're the ones that guide the Baha'i world towards making these various structures. And we have guidelines from Baha'u'llah and broad guidelines about what these buildings should be like. They should have, a circular shape around it, and then graceful lines, and but ultimately something that's simple. And the designs for all these things are ultimately selected by the Universal House of Justice. So their designs are submitted to them for consideration by architects. It doesn't even have to be by Baha'is. Actually, many of them are made by non-Baha'is too. So, yeah. Okay. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
So I only have about 8 or 9 questions so far. But I'll open. I've always recommended people go to Greek Orthodox churches to get a flavor of what the temple in Jerusalem might have been like, and with the idea specifically, of a screened area where only the priests go, and incense and other elements. And I'm curious, Father, what makes the church not yet officially a church? Is it lacking some of those elements, and you plan to build either into it or another building? I'm just curious as to.
Oh, because I said it wasn't like the proper one. Well, I just meant no. I mean, it is. It's just architecturally, it's very small, and it's more of a chapel, and you go in the back and you've got the offices and stuff like that. Usually a church doesn't have that for the Greek Orthodox churches. But I don't believe I have to get the confirmation on this, but it hasn't been consecrated. And that's, I didn't talk about that, but what's having a church consecrated? And it goes right into what you said, Rabbi Mike, about what is holy, and the graves of the righteous are holy. We hold on to that completely, because when a Greek Orthodox church is consecrated, it's sort of like the altar's baptized, and relics or pieces of the bodies of the martyrs or the saints are placed into the altar itself. So here we are hearkening back to worship of God amongst the great cloud of witnesses, as St. Paul says, or at the graves of those who are well-pleasing to God. So.
And I'll ask one more question, and then I'll restrain myself. And that is the comment about icons. And I'm curious as to how that doesn't conflict with making graven images. I mean, I know how we handle that in Judaism, but I'm curious, since it becomes such a central element of Greek worship, how that conflict is resolved.
So it was messy. In the 7th century, it took over 100 years with multiple meetings, and some were legit, some weren't legit. It was bloodshed, and there were weird occult practices of people taking icons and chipping them into the communion, these strange, those are outlying scenarios. But I believe it was St. John of Damascus wrote a very good treatise, which later was upheld in what we call the 7th churchwide or ecumenical, ecumeny, right, is the known world council, where it said that because, and right, this is radical, and I would assume is uniquely Christian, because we say that because God was incarnate, we believe because God became and participated directly within matter, the material world, therefore we might use matter to offer
that's really
veneration to him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to restrain myself and let other folks ask questions.
Well, we just got to go get coffee.
I warn you, when we did this with Father Patrick, I had about a 2.5 hour coffee with him on these issues.
The three of you should get together.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's look at some. Do either of our other speakers have anything they want to add at this point, or questions they want to ask one another?
Yeah, actually, you may not be able to see Linda if you're not a host. That Jerry has her hand up, Jerry Wissett.
Okay.
Tim, you might want to just point that out.
Thank you.
And yeah.
And okay. How do we get to Jerry? I don't know how to. I can't do that. So.
Yeah, she can do it herself.
Okay.
If she just unmutes herself, she can answer.
Okay, Jerry, are you unmuted?
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Go for it.
I wanted to ask if there is actual seating for the prayers, if the Arash could explain if you sit, stand, go on your knees. How do people pray in your sanctuary?
Yeah, there are actually, so there are some seating. There's some seating in the temples. Actually, I can, if you'll permit me, I'll share my screen again. There we go. I don't know if you can see it here on the right hand. Oops, on the right hand side, you can see they kind of blend into the wooden floor, but you can see some chairs there. Yeah. Okay. So you can certainly sit there. Yeah. But in general, how people pray outside of temples, whether it's at home or wherever, there's no prescribed way to do it. There are some. For some of our obligatory prayers, there are positions that we need to take. There's instructions. We prostrate ourselves. We bow down to the ground. So we stand up. We hold our arms up. But in general, for most prayers, you can say it's standing, sitting, cross-legged, whatever helps you connect to the divine, connect to God.
What differentiates your posture? How do you know whether to stand, sit, prostrate yourself for a particular prayer?
Yeah, so in the prayers where Baha'u'llah has revealed those prayers, so the prayers that we say in the Baha'i faith are often prayers that are revealed to us directly from the Prophet. We can make up our own prayers if we want, but typically we say prayers that are given to us by Baha'u'llah, and there are books of them. And in those prayers, there are instructions when they were revealed. There are instructions about, essentially says, okay, stand up and raise your arms towards God, or lower your head to the ground, and the instructions are right there between each of the verses that you recite. Yeah.
And is this only done in the temples, or is this done with what?
Everywhere, not just in temples.
In a temple.
Yeah.
Start with that.
So these are the prayers that I'm talking about are the obligatory prayers. Mm-hmm. They're actually, so every Baha'i has to say their obligatory prayer every day, and they're obligatory meaning just it's obligatory. You have to say it, right? But there are three prayers that you can pick one from. There's a short one, the medium length one, and the long one. The medium length one and the long one have these instructions for standing up and bowing down. So if you say one of those wherever you are, then those are the instructions you do. Ideally, someplace quiet where you can have some privacy. You don't want to go in the middle of Melrose Avenue and start praying on the sidewalk. I don't know if that'll go over that well.
We have a request that you put that beautiful prayer in chat. Can you type that into chat?
Sure.
Just copy and paste.
I can put links to them directly into the chat if that helps. That would be because I think there's a limit on the text I can put in there. Sure.
Okay. There was another question was for you, Arash, is sure. When you're praying in the Baha'i temple, who are you praying to?
Oh, we're praying to God.
To God.
Yeah.
Okay.
The one and only God. Same God as, yeah.
The questioner said it was the Allah of Islam or Muhammad or a different, more generic deity, but you would just say God.
Just God, yeah. I mean, even in Islam, Allah is just the Arabic word for God. It's no difference.
So it would be the God of Abraham.
Yeah, exactly.
Specifically.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can anyone enter a Baha'i temple?
Yeah, it's for all people. All people of all faiths, no faith, all walks of life, all socioeconomic, the whole, everything. No restriction. Men, women, yeah.
Same is true in synagogues, and I would bump it also to Father Constantine about Greek Orthodox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. There were questions for Father Constantine that I imagine I would recommend everybody take a look at his website, which is very complete and has answers to many questions there. I learned an awful lot looking there. Do you have an open house at your church?
Open house, like like a specific day where
people can come and tour and see what it looks like?
Oh, well, I'm around. I like to say I'm chained to the altar, so I'm always, you just call the office, or you can find my cell phone on the bulletins. You shoot me a text, and we'll set it up, and it's fine.
Okay. And can anyone come to your services?
Yes.
Okay. Are there? I did notice on your website there were descriptions of what it's like, and a lot of what the specifics of the way you do things were explained there. So I think I would direct people there too. That was very helpful. Sure.
Well, our goal is always to criticize folks when they show up and don't do stuff right? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No. Hopefully, if we've done our job right, we're just welcoming people to come in and experience the services. So
I know people have gotten much more relaxed in the way they dress when they come to churches, for example. I can't speak for other religious services, but do you have expectations of people who come to your church in terms of their dress?
Well, if I haven't spoken to them ahead of time, I really don't have any expectations. So, but you'd hope not low cut or mini skirts, because it'll distract folks from being able to pray. So,
okay.
But yeah, you just want to be, there's a whole, in terms of Orthodox Christianity, there's a whole spectrum. If you want to go more hardline, more traditional, you'd say long sleeves, pants, and whatever, wear shorts to church, but out here, 21st century California, which to my estimation, California is pretty much the youngest place in the world, culturally. We're very young. If anyone ever saw the Steve Martin movie, LA Story, I think it was, he's giving a British lady a history. He's driving through the city and says, "Oh, here's our historical district. These houses are 50 years old," something like this. So, it's very funny. I'm only 36. What am I? I'm from Portland, Oregon. Who am I to be able to say, "Nice to meet you. Here are the rules," Instead, it's, "Hello, what's your name? My name's this."
I just want to point out, in Reform Judaism, you can enter services topless. And by that, of course, I mean without a yarmulke.
Nice. I liked your olive oil joke. I've never heard that one.
Oh, stick around.
Oh, dear.
Someone has asked the question, and I don't know who it is. Cheryl. Is there a central organization responsible for ordination, but I'm not sure who that's addressed to? Possibly.
Maybe all three can
Arash?
answer it. Maybe all three can answer it.
Okay. Who's responsible for ordination in your faith? Rabbi Mike?
Yeah. So traditionally in Judaism, a senior rabbi literally lays hands. It's called smicha on a student who then becomes a rabbi. So there is a tradition of rabbis ordaining other rabbis, and now that's sort of the biblical Talmudic element, and of course, nowadays, and even I would say in ancient days, there are rabbinic seminaries, and so my seminary is Hebrew Union College, with 4 campuses: Jerusalem, Los Angeles, Cincinnati, and New York. And it is awful that my seminary is the oldest Jewish seminary in the world, all the older ones having been destroyed by Hitler. And our seminary dates back to about 1875. So one of the real issues in the rabbi world, I don't know actually if this is an issue it's not an issue in Baha'i because there's no clergy, but I'm really curious as whether this is an issue in the Christian world. Are people just sort of saying that they're rabbis? I sometimes call this ordination by Vistaprint. how did you become a rabbi? I had cards printed. And, typically people rarely ask me for documentation. And there are sort of fly-by-night seminaries that, for a bunch of money and a little bit of study will grant you smicha. And, and a lot of congregations are hiring these folks. And of course, it upsets those of us who it's a full-time 5-year graduate program. I often joke that I paid for my kids' college, and I'm the only one in my family that is still paying off student loans.
I think in the Christian world, there's a lot of variety there, and it depends on as to whether or not there's a strong hierarchy within an individual denomination. Where there's a bishop or an archbishop, there will be a lot of control. And if somebody's pretending, they will be found out eventually. And it varies among denominations.
So in the Greek Orthodox world, Father Constantine, is there a central structure? And it sounds like there must be.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, there's a whole lot of self-governing churches with hierarchs, bishops. You look at Pentecost and the descent of the Holy Spirit in the Book of Acts, and we see the apostles becoming the first overseers, episcopi, which can also be translated as bishop, episcopal, and then the history books talk about the later they ordained in the letter of St. Paul ordaining other bishops, and then you also see in the Book of Acts the ordination of deacons. We're not exactly sure what form that diaconate took. We just knew that it was freeing up the apostles to preach primarily, so that they weren't also being busy with the good work of waiting tables and caring for the daily distribution. We understand the priest as an extension of the bishop. So and historically in development, we saw that there was a diaconate, diakonos, and bishops. But then as Christianity proliferated, there was need for more local representation from the hierarchs. The bishops couldn't do everything, and so the priesthood. I don't know enough about that area to really speak authoritatively on it in terms of how the priesthood came to be from the bishopric, mind you. But anyway, what do they say? There's 3 things you don't want to see made: laws, sausages, and priests. Right? Wow. It's a messy business. But anyway, we in the U.S. the standard is to go through quite a process of application and receiving the blessing of your local bishop. On the West Coast, we have a metropolitan bishop, Metropolitan Yerasimos of San Francisco, and then you go to seminary on the East Coast 4 years, and then you get a psych eval, make sure you're not a sociopath or something. They're very smart. And then it's finished with the actual ordination, which is very brief within the liturgy. And then they garb you in the robes of the priesthood, and good luck. They send you out. Apostello, apostle, means that he was sent out. So that's the nutshell answer. So So they're in the what we call the rudder, or the pidalion, which is the sort of rules and governances of the church. Every time there was a church-wide council, as well as some major theological issues that were going on at the time, there were issues how to try and fix other issues. And one of the issues very early in the church were at-large priests, folks walking around and showing up at church and saying, I'm going to celebrate the liturgy and I'm a priest. Yeah, I have the robes and everything. And they said, well, you can't be a priest if you're not connected to a hierarch. Because the priests are an extension of the hierarch, right? And so that's all still in place today. If I want to go on vacation to Florida with my family, I have to get a letter. I have to request permission to leave, and then I have to say where I'm going, and then I have to get a letter. And if I want to serve a liturgy, I need to contact the church nearby where we will be, and then I need to connect with the priest there and then get a permission from his local bishop. So it's all very regulated, a little cumbersome. That's okay. That's bureaucracy for you, but it also keeps things all above board so that it's all transparent. So
that's very true in the Catholic Church too. Got a couple more questions for you coming in. Are there any women clergy in the Greek Orthodox Church?
There are not.
Okay. And did you know Greek prior to seminary?
Nope. Well, yeah. I'm just a white guy, but I grew up Italian in a Sicilian household, and I grew up in. If anybody saw the movie A Big Fat Greek Wedding, that was sort of the style of the church that I grew up in. My parents converted from Catholicism and sort of Methodist Baptist backgrounds into the Greek Orthodox faith. So I grew up there with all my friends and their Greek grandparents and all that. So you pick up some things, but it was in seminary where it was really formed that way.
Did you find any difficulty making that change since you weren't culturally Greek to begin with?
Oh, now we're getting personal. Yes. So yeah, you play the chameleon a little bit with having a culture that, is relatable and familiar and yet not your own. And then eventually you grow and mature and you find yourself a good therapist and you figure it out. So
you become a good Greek.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. Okay. Are there any other questions? I think I've kind of.
Yeah. So I will ask a question, Father Constantine. In the Catholic Church, it's only the priest that can affect transubstantiation, which, as I understand it, is literally transforming the wine and the bread into the body, blood and body of Jesus. My understanding in the Orthodox Church is that it's more symbolic than literal, but I want you to confirm that. But also, can anyone do it, or is there anything that a priest can do that no other that you must be a priest to do in the liturgy? By the way, there is not in the rabbinate. The rabbi is a teacher. There is no role. I usually don't like to admit this, but there's no role that you absolutely need a rabbi for.
Well, but you get the training so that you can be authority to teach.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So back to the idea of holy, there's more than one, right? In any older language and in English too, there's more than one word for something. And so we use the word agios, but then specifically we have the word hierevs, and hierevs refers to that which is set aside for a specific purpose. And so the priest is called hierevs, and he goes into the hiero, or the holy place. And so, I'm losing battery power. And anybody who's in full-time ministry and nonprofit and all these things, they wear a lot of hats. You've got to be a fundraiser, you've got to be a teacher, you have to do this and that, an organizer. But for the Eastern Orthodox clergy in the U.S., because it's different organizationally in other countries, if nothing else, we're set aside for the administering of the gifts of the mysteries of the church, mysteria, or the sacraments. And so we do believe at what we call the epiklesis, or the calling, the beseeching of the Holy Spirit. And it's bizarre because I've been a priest about maybe 5 years now, and spent my whole life watching the priests request the gifts to be sanctified, and then to stand in the place of the priest. And here I am being transparent on Zoom with folks, but it's a bizarre thing, and it's daunting. So we believe that it truly is Christ's body and blood.
Okay.
That in the Roman Catholic Church is a little bit more symbolic, but we believe it literally is.
Oh, I think in the Roman Catholic Church it's also literal.
It is.
Linda can correct me on that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think both traditions share that.
Well, there's a conundrum. All right. This is something that our Lord did in the scriptures, scripturally speaking, from the mystical supper, or some folks call it the Last Supper, right? That take, eat, this is my body, take, drink, this is my blood, do this in remembrance of me. And we see later in the epistles that, multiple times St. Paul and in the book of Acts, they're saying we're going to do this because he told us to, right? For a lot of folks in the Old Testament and the New Testament, it's good enough when he said, well, we're going to do it because he told us to. But this day and age, in the age of Reddit, and TikTok, just because God told us to isn't always good enough for a lot of younger folks. But anyway, so this authority was given to the overseers. And again, if the priest is simply, his ordination is an extension of the bishop's ordination, then this is the authority which he has to serve the liturgy. And deacons do not have this authority. They're sort of the hands of the clergy.
Rabbi Mike, is there time left for you to say a word about time being how did you put it, the first holy?
Yeah, so it's just it said God blessed the Sabbath day, and I should look at the actual text, but the last day of creation, the only thing that is described in the Bible until the tabernacle is time, namely the Sabbath is holy. I wanted to ask Father Constantine, when you talked about theosis and imitating God, are you there specifically talking about imitating Jesus, or is there also a sense of imitating Father and Holy Spirit?
Now we're getting into like Trinitarian theology stuff. Mm-hmm. So Saint Basil the Great from the 4th century, one of the bishops, and he was one of the most well-educated guys out there. For being flippant, in one of his exposés on the Holy Spirit, he says that to call upon one person of the Holy Trinity is to call upon all three. So to become like God would be to become like one in essence, three in persons. That's why the Orthodox sign themselves like this with the cross: three persons, one. Yeah. So the attributes of God, right? I mean, we see that he is merciful, that he's compassionate, all of these, he's righteous. All these attributes, they're not relegated to one person or another.
Okay, that's
they're held in common. Yeah.
And my parting shot question is: it occurred to me as my colleagues were speaking, are there places that are, or things that are definitively not holy? And it is interesting because in Judaism, being in a graveyard defiles, and there's all kind. That's why when Jews leave a graveyard, you wash your hands, actually after saying a blessing. On the other hand, graves are holy, so I'm internally puzzled about that. But also, like a bathroom, is definitively less holy, not holy. I'm not even sure what to call it, because in Judaism, you put a little mezuzah on every room in the house, except for bathrooms, actually in storage rooms. So there are things that, defile. And if you read the Hebrew Bible, it's filled with stuff like that. So I'm just curious, for Arash and for Father Constantine, are there places that you would say are not holy?
Let's go, Arash. I'm talking a lot, so please, Arash.
Yeah, I'm like a place that's just de facto, by definition, not holy. Nothing comes to mind.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think we're saying some places are more holy than others.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think so. No.
Yeah, Father.
Yeah. I mean, we one of the first prayers that we pray for in a Sunday morning is to the Holy Spirit, saying He is everywhere present and filling all things. Right? God dwells within His creation, but then at the same time, He respects our radical free will. He gave it to us. Mm-hmm. So the word in Greek for sin is amartia. When you put an a on the front of the word, it means it negates. So martis is the mark, like the archer shooting an arrow at the target.
Oh, wow.
Amartia means to miss the mark.
And that's exactly the same in Hebrew. One of the major words for sin is chet, which is a term from archery, which means to miss the mark. And actually the word Torah comes from a Hebrew root, which means to aim, as in aiming an arrow. And you and I can spend at least an hour talking about the translation of the word Torah into nomos, but I won't get into that. But I will say that just as if you're on the North Pole, the only direction you can go is south. Think about that for a while. I consider to be Auschwitz, which I actually spent a week studying at, to be the pole of evil. And every other direction you go from Auschwitz is less evil. So that is not, again, an official.
Of you said?
Yeah, so I think like a pole of evil, like a concentrate.
Pole, okay.
P-O-L-E, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are certain places which are just horribly evil, and I would say unholy. But that's sort of my own gut rather than deep theology. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I believe we are at our concluding time. Am I right about that, Tim?
You are. Let me put the survey in chat once more time.
Okay, please, if you have not yet completed the survey, please do so. So we'll have your feedback. And we have had two speakers with us today who have been doing this for quite some time now and are practiced at it, and you're still doing a beautiful job. And Father Constantine, I can tell you're going to be asked again.
Yeah, thank you.
So please join us. And everyone who came, we thank you very much for being here. And Tim, when's our next, what's happening next? We should give people a little heads up on that.
Yeah, really quickly. It's March 22nd, and it's Dr. Bill Garlington of the United Methodist Church in Camarillo speaking about the Shinto religion in Japan.
Okay, so join us again.
Yes.
And everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Linda, very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.